Good vibes.
Thank you for tuning in to the Push It Forward Podcast Network. I'm your humble executive producer, Harut, and this is the Cosmic Convos podcast. On Cosmic Convos, Brother Ra and myself gets into how to utilize sidereal astrology as a powerful organizing tool for your life. Whether you're talking about starting a family, getting married, raising children, starting a business, going into a new career, what career you need to choose, and a whole host of other topics relevant to everyone's life. All right. Make sure you check us out on Patreon, where we release exclusive content to all of our patrons, and you get the opportunity to directly interact with us and ask questions and even help us determine the shows that we cover on our weekly podcast. All right. Thank you for tuning in and enjoy.
You are now tuned in to the Cosmic Convos podcast, your number one source for accurate, relevant, and thought-provoking astrological conversations in the podcast nation, the place where stars and minds align.
Peace. You are now tuned into the Cosmic Convos podcast. I'm your humble host, Harut, and I got my good brother here, Brother Ra. How you doing?
Hey, brother. Living, learning, and applying. How about yourself, man?
Hey, man. Like I always say, man, just trying to get like you, my brother, man. Try to take it to the next level or whatnot. You know?
Well, you know, this is the time for you to do it, brother. It's the time for you to do it. It's all in your all the what do you say, the ball's in your court, brother.
Indeed, man. I gotta bounce some joints, man. Just gotta bounce them.
For sure.
Indeed. But before we get too far, I want to remind you all, make sure you like and subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell or whatnot so you can know when we have posted some new content or whatnot. And as always, this episode has been brought to you by Push It Forward Media Group, Vedic Astrology, and our good people over there on Patreon. Big up to y'all. Big up to y'all. If you want to connect with us on social media, you can follow us on Instagram at Cosmic Convo. That's COSMICCONVO on Instagram. And from there, you can get to my personal Instagram, Push It Forward's Instagram, or whatnot. Brother Ra, how can the people get a hold of you?
Plenty of ways. You can definitely get at me via Twitter, Kalapurush Astrology. You can also get at me at IG and Facebook via Shekhem Ra. You can find me online at kalapurushastrology.com and kalapurushastrology@gmail.com. Also get a hold of me as well. So try to cover all platforms, and also you can take a look at Kalapurush Astrology on YouTube as well. So anywhere you go, there we are.
Indeed, and yeah, and that reminds you, make sure you subscribe to all the channels listed as content family on this channel. That's the Kalapurush Astrology YouTube channel that Rod just mentioned. That's the Ninth Lord Films YouTube channel. First We Build podcast YouTube channel. We got some good little traction going on over there, so make sure you subscribe there. Single Dad podcast, and I don't think I posted the Plant-Based for Love one on there yet, but that'll be on there as well. But definitely subscribe to all of the channels within the content family we got going on or whatnot. All right. So here we are getting close to the end of season 5 or whatnot. It's been a pretty interesting one. We are here today at episode 22, number 122 overall. Before we jump into the next episode, Rob, what's the feedback you got on our last episode on the pro athletes and everything like that?
Everybody's amazed and wild how accurate and how easy it is to make the instant connection. You
Right,
know, it's almost effortless once you look at a chart and you just take a look. First Lord, sixth house Mars, third house. It's almost like Aries ascendant, Scorpio ascendant. Moon, it just Aries or the sixth house, and also by default, third house plays just a primary role in
right.
sportsmen and sport and athleticism. So it's a no brainer, and people are finding the ease of making the connections.
Indeed, indeed. And I mean, last episode, for those who haven't checked it out, make sure you go check that out or whatnot. But we really were just pulling up charts, of people of pro athletes with good times, and it didn't fail. You know
It
the
doesn't.
the
It,
it's
it's
in, Go
it's
ahead.
effortless.
Right, right. So that just shows the power of the
Yeah.
science or
And
whatnot.
Western astrology, they try, but they can't get it just like we do it over here in sidereal. So it works wonders.
Right, right. And some people might think that we beating up on Western astrology. It's just, I mean, it just kind of is what it is. I mean, shout out to them and whatnot. Um, but I don't, me personally, I just don't see the value in, using a science, quite in that way. And some people don't say this, but for me, if I did have to, kind of carve out a lane for both astrology systems to be utilized, I would say that Western astrology and sidereal astrology are not even close. We're not even talking about the same things. It's a totally different system altogether. Even though it's using similar nomenclature, it's just not the same. And that's one key thing that people have to realize, right? And that they still use the different signs and stuff like that in the planets, but we are not saying the same thing at all. And theirs is more of a, like, we might have heard us say before, more of a seasonal type of a astrology system. And that's where what they're getting is coming from. And this one is actually a reflection of what's happening, in the stars, how that's impacting us here on Earth. What they're doing is not doing that, something different. So keep that in mind or whatnot. All right, but shoot, before we get into today's topic, did you have anything you wanted to say to the people? Any announcements or anything like that, Rob?
No, not at all. We can dive right in.
All right, so shoot, we got a little mini series we got going on. We did another one of these shows a little earlier this season. Some people have been asking about Nakshatras, and we've been kind of covering them through sprinkling throughout different episodes, but we decided to start focusing in on them through the actual elements. And we did the fire sign Nakshatras. If you haven't seen that one, make sure you go check that episode out. Definitely is a banger or whatnot. But today, we're gonna look at the water sign Nakshatras or whatnot, and how those unfold in various people's life or whatnot. So this is definitely going to be a banger. So let's go ahead and jump into that.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So, you know, it's kind of apropos that we do it this way. I was trying to kind of keep it to where the train of thought it's just an easy mnemonic way of beginning to um, charge it to your memory.
Right.
And you know, when we go through, of course, in order, you know, you know, our earth signs are next. course, after
Mm-hmm.
fire and air and then water. But the brain kind of makes connections in ways that it uses pictures or ideas to kind of formulate understandings. And if fire is the beginning, water is naturally the end.
Right.
Right? And it's interesting to just kind of think about it from that perspective, is that they're right next to one another, and that one starts off and institutes something, and the latter finishes and coalesces things. And so these water signs and their nakshatras have to do with just that, endings, right, and finalizations.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes a lot of sense when you pull the planets down and add them into the equation, because as we discussed in fire signs, you have a repetition of planets that equate and overlap the fire signs. So K2, Venus, and Sun. Well, same thing with water signs. We've got Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little confusing at first to say, well, why would they be, of all the planets, why would they constitute the water signs? Uh, but when you look at the order of the planets, then it just makes so much sense, because, you know, when you looked at fire, you had K2 as the begin. Fire is the beginning, right? But K2 bridges you from a previous existence, right? Perfect sense, because you're coming from one uh, per, um, perspective of a previous existence to a new, which fire brings in, right? This kind of um, rebirth or reacclimation to things. Well, water does the opposite. And so the three planets that constitute water nakshatras just add in very effectively. And it almost boggles the mind as to how the ancients came up with the capitulation to add these planets, or to make these planets a part of these particular rashis or signs. Um, you know, Anytime we look at water, water is also considered a moksha sign. Right? It deals in liberation, or that which releases us from something. Cancer, you know, even though it's the sign of the mother, being the fourth sign, it's a sign of birth, but it's also a sign that releases us from something. When you're inside the womb, right, and you're born, you're released from the waters of your mother. You're released from the encapsulation, or the kind of being withheld, from the world into the world. Right? um, Scorpio, similarly so, in that you have gone through a stage process, and now you're at the precipice of being transformed and moving through things through a re-addition, or being an added component to someone else's family,
Mm-hmm.
or being in a portion where you are now changed or transformed through a sexual experience or through marriage, right? So you're now coming from this stage process from being one on one to now being one to many. And then the last of the stages is Pisces, where you've gone through all the other previous signs up until Pisces, and now you are going to start over or begin anew, and you're going to be released, right, or kind of let go of, in the sense of life's normal, everyday tasks and dealings, which is what Pisces is. It's an otherworldly sign. So all of them have something to do with releasing you from something, or letting go of a grander scheme or a kind of previous process. And this is why we understand that the planets that fit into those nakshatras, they make a whole lot of sense. Right? So
Indeed.
um, the first of the three, right, is uh, Cancer. And Cancer, as we and well, before we even do that, let's talk about the planets and what planets govern or are connected to as nakshatra lords through the water signs. First of all, is Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
And Jupiter is a primal planet that connects all water signs. It's the bridge between air and water. Then we have Saturn, Saturn is in the middle, right, of all water or moksha signs. Right? It's in the middle. It's usually from 3 degrees, right, 20 minutes to 16 degrees, 40 minutes of that particular sign. Jupiter is usually from 0 degrees, just to give you some degree work, some degree um, connections. Jupiter is always 0 degrees to 3 degrees, 20 minutes. Saturn is 3 degrees, 20 minutes to 16 degrees, 40 minutes. And then Mercury, the last planet of all water signs and the last planet in the context of all nakshatras themselves, Mercury is between 16 degrees, 40 minutes to uh, 30 degrees of each particular water sign. So we're going to talk about why these planets make sense in the context of where they are and what they do. But Cancer being the first water
You
sign, the
know,
first moksha sign. Go ahead.
you know, of course, I'm very familiar with these. I have a planet and in each water sign and in each nakshatra. I
Hmm.
mean, each nakshatra ruler, somewhere or another,
Right.
all of them. So it's interesting
It
and
is. It
whatnot.
is. Jupiter being the ruler of um, Punarvasu, right,
Hmm.
which is the first nakshatra in Cancer. And it's only 3 degrees, 20 minutes of it. Very small portion, but it's actually this particular portion of Cancer is actually considered to be one of the strongest and most beneficial portions of the whole zodiac. Right? That little sliver, that little 3 degrees, 20 minutes, right? Between 0 degrees to 3 degrees 20 minutes is literally considered one of the most beneficial places of the whole zodiac, and this is because it's a dual. It has several things. Number one is considered what is called Vargadama, where whatever planet is placed in this position is placed in that same position in the same sign in the Navamsha or the D9 chart.
Hmm.
So that's number one, right? Number two, in any Vargadama planet is considered boosted, not better, but boosted in the sense of its placement. So if it's a benefic planet or benefic placement, is boosted. If it's malefic, it's also considered boosted, but nonetheless still considered one to be the strongest. And that's also a pushkara of pushkara navamsha. So and pushkaras are very, very beneficial particular portions of the zodiac. So very, very, very helpful in the sense of it's if it's been benign energy. Now, this particular pada or this particular portion of Cancer is also where Jupiter is exalted. So it makes sense. And a lot of times you'll find, not all, but a lot of times you'll find the sun or the planet, excuse me, to be exalted in a nakshatra that has something similar to do with itself. Right.
Hmm.
So Jupiter is exalted at 3 degrees, 23 degrees, right? Cancer. So this is also one of the reasons why it's considered one of the most benefic or one of the most helpful portions of the zodiac. But Jupiter is a planet that deals in, and just before I get there, think about it from this perspective. All of the last of the signs, which is our water signs, have the last two planets that are inside the signs, right? Rahu and Ketu are, yes, planets, but they're not traditionally, in the sense, physical planets. They're sensitive points in the sky. So Jupiter being the last, second to the last, and Saturn being the last, right, of the planets.
Right.
Well, the last of the planets makes sense to be in the last of the signs. So when you begin to understand it, it makes a lot of sense why it's placed in such a way. But Punavasu really talks about renewal, and the waters of Cancer is just that. It can be renewing, right? A lot of times, in ritual space, you'll find people go to the ocean, right? They go to water, beds of water or large bodies of water, rather, to be renewed, right? To be refreshed, to be re energized, to be reborn.
Hmm.
So Jupiter has a very substantial part in that because Jupiter is that planet that deals in forgiveness, right? It deals in moving beyond, seeing the bigger picture, being the bigger person, having a spiritual outlook. And of all the signs, again, guess what? The most spiritual are water signs, right? They're the most spiritual. They feel, the most of all because it's a feeling based sign. It's emotional uh, um, placement. So, makes sense for Jupiter to rule the first piece of the puzzle in Cancer, which is Punarvasu. It talks about returning, right, being reacclimated, right, and it also talks about leaving home and returning to what? Home.
No.
And Cancer is a sign of home, isn't it?
Right. Yep. Fourth
So
sign,
it
fourth
makes
house.
perfect sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
It really does. The next is Pushya. And Pushya, Saturn, it's a Saturn ruled nakshatra from 3 degrees 20 minutes to 16 degrees 40 minutes of Cancer. So it's a little odd. You'd be like, why would Saturn be in a water sign? Well, Saturn is also considered a very spiritual planet, but it deals in, finalization. Saturn is also considered the planet of death. And moksha signs, right, deal in learning to move into a finalization piece of the puzzle. So Saturn ruling this particular portion of Cancer, right, fits very well because not only this, it is also tied to Brihaspati, which is also connected to Jupiter, but
Right.
it's a finalization process as well because Pusha is also called the teat of the cow, right? Where everything that the cow has eaten, gone through, is brought to a point of finalization and then released, and given to its calf. So
Right.
it takes things very seriously. It is a very heartfelt and devotional nakshatra, but it's also one that um, it takes its time. Just like a mother takes its time with its youth, Cancer takes its time with whatever it does in the sense of Pushya. So Saturn ruling this, again, these things begin to make sense once you understand the inner meaning of the sign. That's what the nakshatras do. They unlock the inner meaning of
Right.
what these particular rashis stand for. So by all means, Saturn does very well as a ruler of this particular portion of Cancer. Now, if Saturn is placed there, then you have to consider, right, which particular portion of or which pada, which 3 degrees 20 minutes of Cancer it's placed in. It doesn't do well in all padas. It does well in the third pada of Cancer, which is Libra. So it's not necessarily does well in every regard, but it
Yeah,
is
because the first.
boosted. So Saturn's energies are going to be boosted. So you'll find more of a solemn, sobering, serious, sometimes depressive, sometimes melancholy disposition with Saturn placed there. Of course, aspects, rulerships, and things like that always make a difference, but Saturn does very well in one particular portion of this particular nakshatra. But again, it is one that definitely has a very um, mature way of looking at things, which Saturn, again, helps out in the sense of being able to rear or to grow something to its finalization.
Right.
Saturn, right?
Yeah, because that
And
first
then of
part
course
will
the
put it
last,
in
what'd you
Leo.
say?
Let's say, yeah, because that first part will stick it in Leo.
Doesn't do well, right?
No.
Right. Second pot of Virgo in
Yeah.
mediocrity, but the third is Libra, and so it's exalted in that sense in the Navamsha. So it does very well there. And then the fourth is Saturn, a Scorpio, not so hot. So the last of the three, right, is Ashlesha. Now I can honestly tell you, Ashlesha kind of gets a bad rap, right? Um, it is considered a very adverse nakshatra, and Mercury. You got to understand Mercury and water. If Mercury is placed in a water sign, it's not in the greatest position. So why would Mercury be good in the sense of owning one of these particular portions of water? Well, Mercury deals in communications. And in order for Cancer or any water sign to finalize its growth process, to get over the hump, to make a transition, it has to deal in learning how to what? Take those emotions, which is inner, and bring them what?
Out. Yeah.
Out,
Communicating. Yeah.
right? Water signs are considered mute signs. Most people don't know that. They don't do very well in the sense of self-articulation and expression. Doesn't mean water signs can't talk or, you know, let you know what's on their mind, but in the sense of being able to be objective, which is what Mercury wants us to do, right? It's a learning curve that allows Cancer to finalize and to get through and over a lot of challenges in relating or releasing that emotion. And so this is again releasing, right, which is moksha. It just makes perfect sense when you add them all up. So Mercury ruling Ashlesha, which is also governed by Shesha, the serpent, the coiling one, right? Um, you know, when we get wound up, right? And you wind up, enough and wind up and wind up and wind up till you can't wind up anymore. The opposite happens when there's an uncoil. The coils is winding, but there's an uncoiling, right? And that uncoiling is a release of all of the things. Cancers can be they can hold things in for
Well,
a
I
long
mean,
time. Any water
it
sign kind, right?
I mean, crab is, got a shell, so it can kind of
Yeah,
get
it can
back in
hold,
that,
right?
yeah, come back in that shell a
Right. It
little
can
bit.
hold, live in that shell, definitely, right?
Yeah.
Well, you can
Especially if you're
only do
talking about
that
like
for
a
so
hermit
long,
crab.
right?
If you think of
Right.
a
Cancer
hermit crab as
showing
a
its
good
path, yeah.
example, you can get in that shell a little bit, you know what I'm
hmm
saying?
hmm
And then you gotta, yeah, so it's interesting. Yeah.
And so being inside of something or being holding something inside of us, and we all have water signs, right? Don't think that it's just hitting on water ascendants or anything like that. We all have some place where water is. So look at that house or that area to kind of understand maybe what this particular process looks like for you in that regard,
Right.
right? In that area. If it's Aries, could be the fourth house of emotions and home and mother, where you feel wound up, right? Where you feel like, or it could be your upbringing, could be education, could be different things for you per se based on what your ascendant is. But in the side of the Cancer is this kind of, um, that mechanism that the intellect plays a very finalizing role. The heart is first for water, right? Then the mind in the sense of the intellect. And so this is why Mercury is at the end, and Ashlesha can be considered, right? One of its powers is to inflict venom, right? To inflict poison. And so it teaches, right, the process of using our words with a proper intent, with being able to know that what we say can hurt or injure, but it also can heal. It also can be a catharsis where we let things go and move out from a infantile to a more mature or more adult like perception or way of relating. So this is why Mercury, right, is the last of all of the water signs, and particularly so the last of Cancer, and that it can be very um, powerful in both ways, from hurting through words and healing through words. Remember, when you use words in a trance like state, if you think that, if I tell you you're drinking water, if I'm telling you you're drinking vodka, when I put you in a trance when you're drinking water, you'll believe it's vodka, right? Like hypnotic powers of the emotions come through Ashlesha, right? Hypnotism uses what? Words,
Words.
doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right. Right. So, and each one of these nakshatras has a shakti, has a power to it. Well, maybe we'll do a special on something similar like that. Not all of them, but maybe just pick a few and see the shaktis at work. Right. Maybe that will do that next season. Right. So, each one of these has a power, and the power to inflict venom, right, or poison. Right. Well, if you take in consideration, right? Like we talk about, words have power, don't they? Words can put you in they can put you in a spell. A lot of times they say Ashleisha likes to work spells, right?
Right.
They consider black magic is part of Ashleisha, witchcraft, Ashleisha, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it gets a bad rap to a degree, but, they say, I guess according to common folklore, not all witches are bad, right? Some witches can use their powers to help, to protect, right? And this is also a part of that Ashleisha. It likes to protect. Now, one thing you don't want to do is mess with Ashleisha's mate, children, or family. You will get the venom very quickly, right? This is, in fact, where the claws of the crab reside in this particular consideration. And again, the other thing about these particular um, portions of the constellations have stars that are connected to them,
Right.
right? The Hydra is one that is connected to Ashleisha. So it is the claws of the crab. So, be very careful with Ashleisha. Be very mindful that they can be very affectionate and very clingy and very concerned, but also very overly protective, smothering into a degree, right? Stifling in the sense of how they move through this cathartic process of learning to let go of what's inside. So
It's
that
interesting, with Ashleisha as a, not me, but I'm just saying what I've observed with Ashleisha as an ascendant for people. They oftentimes have like cat-like features,
in
like a
fact, they have a
cat-like
very
face.
keen, sharp disposition. Yeah, yeah, they do.
Even Johnny
Very much
Depp,
sharp.
we covered Johnny Depp. He has that look,
He has
like,
those eyes. Yeah, those hypnotic, right? They have
yeah,
they have a hypnotic stare, like a serpent, like
right,
Ashleisha, Shesha, the serpent, right? Serpent. So um, now the next portion, or the next set of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury ruled nakshatras, or nakshatra, is Scorpio,
right,
right? And Scorpio as a sign, right, usually gives a very kind of frustrating bid. And Scorpio is not, as they say, right? They give this, they give it the secretive, um, you know, label, and it's actually somewhat true, somewhat not true, right? But Jupiter rules,
it
again,
just
0 degrees to 30, zero
Scorpio can
degrees.
Scorpio can operate in the dark. You know what I'm saying?
It can,
You
but
know
only
that,
for so long,
right?
right?
Yeah.
Only for so long, because to hunt, it must come out of his cave, right? It must come out of his cubby, unless you just happen to be unfortunate enough to walk into it, right? But most of the time, right, it has to come out of its particular um, insular mode to do what it has to do. And that's the suddenness, that's the shocking value of Scorpio.
Right.
But nonetheless, Jupiter does rule a portion of Scorpio, which is again 0 degrees to 3 degrees 20 minutes. And this portion of Scorpio, actually considering, debilitates, right, the moon. Now, why would Jupiter's nakshatra debilitate the moon? I always wondered, why would that be? Right. Well, you got to consider this portion of Scorpio as, again, the claws of the Scorpio. So remember, the claws of the scorpion, or the claws of Cancer is at the very end. The claws of the Scorpio is at the what? Very beginning. And so it's very interesting that the intensity of what we call Vishaka, right? It kind of, it damages the moon. Vishaka right, means almost like it sounds, to shock,
You know,
right?
the interesting thing is that the sun is debilitated in the previous nakshatra
It sure is, right? Sure
or
is, right?
whatnot.
Right
There's
behind it.
all types of these
There's
little,
all these all these kind of connections, right? Hidden
right.
connections, right? You
Mm-hmm.
could study astrology for eons, right, and see something, you know, these things in relation to how they're connected and things like that, right? So, and the same thing with when you look at Aries, right?
Mm-hmm.
In a similar way, not directly after, but the nakshatra following is where the moon is exalted. So,
Mm-hmm.
interestingly enough, no, actually, it's almost similar, right? Very close, because sun is exalted at 10 degrees, moon is exalted at, right, 3 degrees. Same,
Right.
similar piece of the puzzle here. But the intensity of Vishaka, right? And Vishaka means also to split, right? It's a forked. It talks about forking, and when the mind is forked, the emotional component of the mind is forked. It's hard for us to kind of understand our choices, and for the mind to have a confusing aspect to it. This is why it's debilitated in this particular portion of Scorpio. Vishaka can also be considered what is one pointed or singular focused. At times, it can be myopic. At all times, also times it can be considered concentrated. It just depends on the placements of what's going on inside this particular nakshatra. But the moon is debilitated because of the intensity that Vishaka brings inside of the Scorpio side of inside what, because Vishaka is connected to Libra. In Libra, right, it does very different. It's very different combination. But in
Mm-hmm.
Scorpio, it's intense, right? It's focused. It's overly focused. It can't wiggle, right? It can't change. It's hard for it to maneuver because Vishaka's one pointedness brings a lowering of the mental, right, viability. So this is what it is. This is why it is considered damaged in this particular portion of Scorpio. But it is ruled by Jupiter, and Jupiter happens to deal with expansion, growth, right? It deals with seeing the broad context of things. Um, deals with religion, sometimes spirituality, and Scorpios can. Remember, I told you all water signs are the what? The most what? Spiritual.
Spiritual. Mm-hmm.
So, the moon, when it grows, right? And it grows, it can grow in air, it can grow in water, right? If it grows in water, it's growing too much, isn't it? Right? In the sense of the fieriness of the water of Scorpio, not a
Mm-hmm.
good thing to do. So this is when it turns and capitulates over and over, something over and over, over and over and over and over. This is what Vishaka does in the side of Scorpio for the moon. Now, other planets placed there may actually do very well. So the sun actually does very well, right, in this particular portion, because when you understand how the nakshatras work, right, then you start off with Cancer and end with Pisces. So
Mm-hmm.
the sun in this particular portion does fairly well. Jupiter also, guess what, does well in this particular portion of Scorpio because it's exalted here in the Navamsha.
Mm-hmm.
So, certain planets will do very well, certain planets will suffer, right? Um, Saturn does not do well here, right? Of course, Moon is debilitated. Mars also is very challenged in this position because it's debilitated in the Navamsha. So certain planets can handle it. Certain planets are overwhelmed or undermined. So this is what you can understand, that the excessiveness of Jupiter is seen here, right? The bigoted, right, or um, unbalanced side of Jupiter is in this particular portion of Scorpio. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So this is what Vishaka is, right? It is having that ability to, right, become go overboard, right? Having no balance. Remember, Libra is all about balance. Scorpio is all about all or what?
Nothing.
All or nothing. Yeah, right. Love or hate, right? Right. Loathing, right? Or complete enamoring. So this is why in this portion it does what it does. Now the next portion is Anuradha.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they kind of go together because Vishaka, another name for it, is Radha, and Radha is the one that is considered the wife of Krishna, and it talks about devotion. Now, the first we talked about Radha with Vishaka in the Scorpio side is overly devoted, right? It's too much devotion. It's too much, right? Adoration. It's too much being having to have something and willing to
Mm-hmm.
go to great lengths to get it no matter what, right? The mind becomes too fixated in this sense. Well, in the next nakshatra, Anu, which is after Radha, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is when the Saturn particular portion of Scorpio comes into play from 3 degrees 20 minutes to 16 degrees 40 minutes. Now, the four portions of this is very interesting in how it's situated, but Saturn itself, right, as a ruler of Scorpio, still talks about that process of having to come to a a crystallization of something. You know, the emotions become crystallized. Emotions become um, tangible almost, in the sense that Anuradha deals in um, making sure that you face great adversity in order to become transformed into a new being. Again, that death rebirth process we talked about, right?
Right.
So, in that sense, right, this particular portion of Scorpio, Anuradha, is governed by a very interesting and very kind of different placement, I would think, in the sense of what it is, but it's called Mitra, the god of friendship, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Scorpios can be very loyal, right? They can be very loyal. They can be very loyal
Mm-hmm.
to a fault, even because of the fixed nature of Scorpio. So Saturn ruling it, right, gives a rigidity. If you look at the Scorpion, it has a hard what?
Has a hard
Right?
shell, yeah. Hard.
So does Cancer, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah.
Saturn again, right? So this hardness of the crustaceans, the hardness of the shell comes into play here. Now it'll be very different. It's going to be very different in Pisces. We'll see how in a minute, right? But in the crustacean of, or the hardness, the crystallization of these particular creatures, right? They get tough skin, don't they?
Oh yeah.
Right? It's hard to penetrate them. It's hard to know them, and they can be very probing and very mysterious. And so this particular portion, right, is one that it has to learn the process of betrayal, right? It has to be crushed by, right, by something or someone that has betrays them. And that's why Mithra, the god of friendship, rules, right, this particular portion, which is called Anuradha. So it has to learn through hard lessons, through very frustrating apparatuses. A lot of times, Anuradha have problems with their mothers, believe it or not. Now, a little secret so you know, right? The fourth away from Scorpio is what? Aquarius, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which connects through this rulership. And so, a lot of times, because it's the fourth, which is the mothering principle from it, it has a problem, right? Because it's also connected to what is called um, a very the third house is considered an evil house to some degree. So these two combinations, literally, a lot of times on the Radha can feel very betrayed or very let down by the mothering principle in their life. And so this begins the process of betrayal, of feeling let down, of feeling, frustrated behind, not feeling supported. And they get thick skinned from the very beginning. So they get tougher and tougher and tougher until the catharsis comes in and they have to overcome, right, this isolatory or this kind of standoffishness and then move into a deeper sense of relating to others. And this is where they try to befriend and they do it over and over and over until they learn how to do it instead of just doing it. So it's interesting that Saturn has a connection to this. And in this particular portion, right, you have Leo, right? You have again Virgo. You have, and these if you notice they're repeating, aren't they? Right,
Yeah.
repeating over in Libra and then Scorpio. So Saturn will do very well in that third pada. Right? Won't do so well in the others. Um, uh, Sun will better in. Sun can do well in Scorpio, right? It doesn't do well in the third pada. It does well in the first pada of this one, right? Sun and Scorpio can be very powerful, very very powerful. As an ascendant, it's the 10th lord in the ascendant. So Sun in this particular portion of Scorpio, they're no joke, right? They're very intense, very direct, very heated, and very kick butt, take no prisoners types energy, right? Sun also does well in the last portion of our last pada of this particular nakshatra. So the Sun can be placed well there. Jupiter can also be placed somewhat well in that particular first pada and last pada as well. But this is just when you begin to understand the repetitious process of how these nakshatras are best facilitated by these rulers. Last of the Mohicans, right? In this regard, Jayesta, right? And Jayesta is between 16 degrees, right? Uh, 16 degrees, 40 minutes to 30 degrees of Scorpio.
Yeah.
Well, you know, um, this one here is very, uh, I'd say, probably the most intense of all.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, Jayesta is very intense. If you thought, and Ashlesha is intense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Don't get me, it is intense, right? But it's still Cancer, right? So it might hit you with some venom, right? I mean, if you look at Johnny Depp, he had to use some venom, didn't he? Right?
I
But
mean, listen. So he. I mean, it's interesting that you said that because, I mean, he used some venom, but the way that he got it was like very, like he had
yeah,
to
benign. Yeah,
record on the low and stuff like that, like and
he
then
didn't
it's like
come all out.
yeah,
Right?
exactly.
He didn't come. I'm sure there's
Exactly.
probably things that he probably really could have done very differently, right?
Right.
If we really want to know the truth, but he
Mm.
did it just as a self what
Protection.
protective mechanism, right?
Right.
Self preservation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what cancers will do. Like I said, they squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. And then, at that point when, they feel like you're trying to wiggle or get out of it, they hit you. Right.
Yeah.
Now, Jayesta is completely different. This is the stinger of the scorpion.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A little different, right? That stinger, right? Antari is the heart of the scorpion, right? It's a red star,
Mm-hmm.
right? A red star, right? It's opposite Aldebaran, which is the eye of the bull, right?
Right.
So this is a very intense, very um, harsh nakshatra. It can be very unforgiving and vindictive, in the least, to say the least. When you think about it from the perspective of the god that rules it, Indra,
Mm-hmm.
right? Indra is the king of the gods. If you ever want to know kind of how these things look, go to the movies sometimes, right? And take out a look at Thor, right? Take a look at Thor. Thor wields the hammer, Mjolnir, right? And he's kind of like, now they make him goofy, right? In the movies, like a dullard,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not how Jayesta is at all, right? They
Oh no.
they have a very keen, sharp, penetrating, researching type disposition. They will peel you back through the layers. But in the sense of Thor, right? It's the sense of being unconquerable. You can't get them to where they will stop. Right? Thor keeps getting hit, and he gets what? He gets right back up. It doesn't
Right.
stop until either you or I are what? Dead.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is the intensity of Jayesta. Jayesta means the eldest most, or the eldest, the senior most.
Right.
Right? So it has a sense of authority. It has a sense of, being number one. Well, the Mercury portion of it is its own belief.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's belief in its invincibility. And this can be a chink in the armor, right? Because it doesn't always think that someone else can be more powerful when there's always the old adage that someone else is better than you, right?
Right.
May take you a while to get there, but in the event you will meet your match. And a lot of times, Jayesta, there's Achilles' heel, as they don't assess the weakness of the one that they think they can beat.
Think Mike
Right?
Tyson.
Because exactly, right?
Yeah.
Right. You don't think about it until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
And then now you have a problem because the intensity is met with intensity. You got to bring some to what? Get some. And every
Mm-hmm.
time someone that's Jayesta is faced with someone that is overly qualified, more qualified, more prepared, more disciplined, more driven, right? It becomes an all out battle. And that's where Jayesta gets caught because it doesn't know when to stop.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't know when to say, okay, enough is enough. And it can create killers. The killer instinct, let me say, not killers, killer instinct. Like you said, right? Mike Tyson, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dude would not stop. I'll take your ear. I'm getting something, right? Ear, something's coming with me.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, it's a very powerful nakshatra, and planets that are placed there. It's the last four portions, last four signs of the zodiac. So you got Sagittarius, and this is also what we consider now. Mind you, I didn't mention. Let me make mention. All of them contain Gandanta zones.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Mercury portions of the signs are those Gandanta zones, aren't they?
Yeah.
Right. Especially the last pada of each one. The last 3 degrees, 20 minutes of each one of these particular nakshatras is all in all a Gandanta zone, a point in which things are knotted up, things are tied, things are bound, overly bound. So it creates a overwhelming energy. And in this particular portion of Scorpio, all of them, the last padas are Pisces. So it is a very hard area to deal with, especially when there are malefic planets placed there. The benefics will still have this same type of drowning effect, but in the sense of all in all, right, malefics are going to do very destructive and usually not externally destructive, but self-destructive things.
Mm-hmm.
More so in Cancer than in Scorpio, because Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which will take out its aggressions or energies on things or people around them, where Cancer will be self inflicting, whereas it's talking about drugs, addictions, and things that can do itself harm.
You know, because I got two planets in Jesta. Um,
Mhm.
it's like a you said like penetrative, and in regards to like how it gets to things sometimes. It's like you know how some people can. It's like you have to go in it to know it. You understand what I'm saying? Type of thing. You know what I'm saying? Like how you go through life, that intensity with
Mhm.
certain aspects. It's like for you to know it for that particular wherever those planets are governing. It's like you have to go in it to get something out of it. You understand what I'm saying or whatnot? Versus like being able to observe it from the outside and you know what I mean? It's that type of energy or
You have to
whatnot.
do
Likes
it
to
to know.
get
You have to
into
be it
it.
to know it. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. Yeah. I mean, definitely so. Right, and when you deal with Jayesta, it is one that like I said, it's all or nothing. Well, this one is more all or nothing than probably all the rest.
Right.
More than anything in Cancer and Ashleisha, and more than anything else in any other particular nakshatra in Scorpio. This one is I will get there by all costs, by all means. Right? Now if you think Vishaka is relentless, and it is, right? Jayesta is probably double that because it doesn't like to feel victimized,
Mm-hmm.
right? It doesn't, right? Remember, the last one's about betrayal. Well, this one's about betraying, right?
Mm-hmm.
It will not be victimized. I will get you before what? You get me.
Yeah.
Right? And so some of the areas that are kind of um, involved with it is like military bases or jungles, things that are impenetrable, things that are not hospitable, and where you can just walk in and out. Like you said, you got to get in it, right,
Yeah.
and be in it in order to understand how to get out of it.
Right.
And so this is where these intensities can breed people that have a lot of martial energy. The Mercury principle is the intellect. So imagine the intellect tied to martial ability,
So you get like,
right?
you know, CIA, style type, you know.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Yeah.
espionage, right?
Yeah.
Double agents, right? The
Right.
Mercury, double agent,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
um, and so it can be very deceptive, very cunning. You know, if you had to connect this to Kemet, this would be the star of Set. Right? Remember, Set is force
Mm-hmm.
combined with what? Deception, right?
Yeah.
Antares is the star of Set in reality, really is,
Mm-hmm.
right?
I
Antares
can
is the
see that.
star of Set. So if you want to know how our ancestors saw it, hey, right there, that one right there, right? That's the star that Set is born under. So the Sethian type disposition, right? Set is warlike. So
Mm-hmm.
warmonger loves battles and taking things to the death and transforming through adverse circumstances. Remember, Set considered himself more important, right, than his brother Osar, didn't he? Right,
Yeah.
the senior most, right.
Yeah.
So again, if you want to relate these things, I try to give you some type of, external different capitulation to tie them all together so that you can see it right in different forms for what it is. Because it's not just in the sense of this particular spiritual system, right? It's outside of Santana Dharma. It's inside of many other cultures, right?
Right.
Ogo, right? In the Dogon is this same principle, Ogo, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one that leaves the womb before he gets a mate. Isn't it interesting how it's senior most is what it means? And then Ogo is the one that doesn't have its twin, right? It leaves the womb first before it's completed. Senior most, I'm first. Set, right? Doesn't really have a wife. I mean, Neptet for all intents and purposes, but Neptet is also Osara's wife. So it doesn't really have something of its own. It's kind of
Right.
a standalone energy. And the power that is tied to it is the ability to arise or go beyond perilous circumstances. So in order to do that, you have to go through something perilous, don't you? Right?
Yeah.
So if you find, let's say, the ninth lord there, you may find that your father had to go through something very perilous or adverse in order to overcome some great odds. If you find the fourth lord there, could be your mother. It's deep how these things, just that little simple placement there, right?
Mm-hmm.
The third lord, right? Your younger siblings may have, been dealt a bad hand and have to come from um, have not and to have.
So I'm gonna throw you one, right?
Uh-huh.
My fourth lord is there, and my
Mm-hmm.
mother transitioned. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she went
Mm-hmm.
through cancer. She died relatively early. Matter of fact, 45.
It's amazing, isn't it?
Right.
It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing, right? The fourth lord being there, right, has to go through something that where it is attacked, right, and has to have a defense that's put up in order for it to be able to move beyond, certain adverse circumstances. So this is what the power is. It's called Arohana Shakti.
Mm-hmm.
So right, it also gives its wearer, right, not to say the person that dealt with it, but per se you, to have some of those powers to deal with things that help you move beyond certain um, unfortunate circumstances. So, we could use these nakshatras, y'all, all kind of ways, right? If you have Venus there, you may have had, right, to deal with a potential mate in the beginning, right? That brought you to some realization that, nah, I need to choose wisely. I need to choose differently. I need to think before I leap. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So these are things that can, or it can mean that you have a wife or a mate, a husband that can deal with adverse circumstances. That is tough skinned to a degree, right? The karakas and indicators can also be used as well. So you can tie this in that regard also. So just to kind of consider that, the wife may be a warrior, right? Have a warrior like stance, ready to take on battles, right? I got your back, you got mine type disposition. That's what Venus can also, or the seventh lord even, can do there as well. So
Mm-hmm.
to move on into the last of the particular sign, Pisces. Pisces is a very interesting one because these other two were crustaceans, right? There were one, well, not crustaceans, but one has Cancer is a crustacean, but
Mm-hmm.
it has a hard shell, and so does Scorpio. It's an arachnid. Well, this one is neither. It's fish,
Yeah.
two fish, right? But the fish aren't going in the same what
Direction.
direction. See, a school of fish swims in sync, doesn't it?
Yep.
A school of fish will move like water itself, right? You see it and they move, just how they move like one body, not Pisces. It moves against itself. So remember that, right? Once Pisces learns to move like the fish in a school, then it becomes empowered. But because it moves in opposition to itself, the currents and the tides, right, kind of can create a ripple effect and they pull on each other.
Mm-hmm.
There's a link between the two. So this is where we understand that, the first portion of this is Purva Bhadrapada from 0 degrees, right, to 3 degrees 20 minutes. Purva Bhadrapada is considered having two faces,
Mm-hmm.
right? Just like the two fish is an like the way they styled it, it's like wow. Because it is also, the majority of it is in what? Aquarius.
Yeah.
But it's two faces like two fish. So it's ruled by Jupiter. And they consider this particular pada, this particular portion of Pisces, the most spiritual of all. It is, right? Because it's Jupiter ruled, and it's Jupiter ruled, isn't it?
Right.
Right. It's a doubling of Jupiter. And if Jupiter is placed there, guess what? Jupiter becomes what? Exalted, doesn't it? In the
Yep.
Navamsha.
Yeah.
So this is very powerful for Jupiter placements. Now,
But
again,
I mean, when you say that though, it's because it's also a kind of it's like I don't want to say dark. It's spiritual, but it's like because
it's
Purva
intense.
Bhadrapada, yeah, it's a different,
It's
like
intense.
Yes,
It's not like lightweight.
right.
No. When I say spiritual, I mean you got to realize what spirituality is first.
Right.
It's not it's not a cakewalk,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um, it's very it has a depth to it that can be overwhelming and drown most people.
Mm-hmm.
But because it is Jupiter, right, it does give that buoyancy.
Yeah.
Right? It gives it to where you can float in the midst of a vast ocean.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine being in the middle of the ocean where there's no land in sight, no island coming, no boat, in the midnight black, pitch black, right? That's that portion.
Yeah.
But because you're at peace through these types of circumstances, through this, I mean, if you want to talk about frightening, drop somebody off in that spot, right?
Right.
And come pick them up 2 hours later, right? It'd be like I felt some bump against me, right? I couldn't see, right? Right, right.
Yeah.
This the intensity of it, right? And there's no
Yeah.
moon, right? You hope that you see a star, right? They can give you
Mm-hmm.
a glimmer of light because waters are black at that point. But at the same time, right? Once this person calms themselves, relaxes, goes into the flow, learns to float, becomes lifeless in the sense of not having any real movement, true stillness. That's what
Mm-hmm.
this particular portion is. Right? And that's what peace is, isn't it? It's the true stillness in the midst of the darkness that's around you. But it's also very spiritual. And I say they can have an occult powers you wouldn't believe, right? A very strong intuitional sense. Because Pisces is pure intuition. Right? It knows without knowing. It feels without thinking.
Yeah.
So this particular portion is very powerful. Um, Planets can do well there in the general sense. You really don't have any planets that are going to be hammered there. It's almost kind of like the first portion of Cancer to some degree, right? But it's more because of the Piscean nature. It has just a better outcome because there's nothing that can be debilitated there except Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Mars can't be debilitated there. Saturn can't be debilitated there. No other planet can be debilitated there except Mercury. And Mercury's debilitation is more or less benign, if you really want to be honest, right? If all of the planets that are debilitated, Mercury he doesn't really have the sting of the other planets that go bad. It kind of
Yeah. They
just,
just kind of
I can,
get drowned in the details and the like the
confusion.
confuse.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Confusion, right? So, very deep, powerful portion, but it can be very intense and it can go either way if there are certain planets placed there like Rahu. It can become very, very intense in the dark side of things because there's no light there, is
Mm-hmm.
it? There's no resilience there, so it can be devious, and you don't know what they're doing until it's too late, right? Because remember, it's two-faced.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very interesting that it has both signs connected through Jupiter, but you gotta consider how Pisces is the last and the most lost yet found of all. Right, Pisces is
That is,
the last.
right.
Right, it's like going through a forest and you're almost at the end of the forest trying to come out, and you can feel you're about to be there. So you panic. You look at every direction. Man, I hear something. I know something's out there, but I just don't know which way to go. That's kind of the Piscean energy, especially at this particular portion of Pisces.
Right.
Right. So it's very Purva Bhadrapada is intense in and of itself. It is not a lightweight energy, y'all. It's ruled by the serpent of the serpent of the atmospheres, the fire dragon. So imagine a fire dragon just being hit by water. The steam and the heat, the intensity of it, right, can be boiling to a point.
Right.
So you got to consider this particular portion as one that it can do be very, very good or what?
Yeah.
Very, very challenging. Right?
Yep.
Moving on into the last of the Saturn ruled nakshatras, this is Uttara Bhadrapada, right?
Mm-hmm.
Purva Bhadrapada means the first Bhadrapad, right? Or the first portion of the bed, the deathbed, right? It's a deathbed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Funeral cot.
living on your deathbed, right?
Yeah.
You ever talk to people that deal in hospice work,
Mm-hmm.
right? When you're on your deathbed, Purva Bhadrapada is the bucket list, right? It's the bucket list. You know, the bucket list where you say, look, I'm going to live life to my what?
to my fullest, to the fullest, to the.
Not caring, right? That
Yeah.
intensity. I'm going to do it all before I check out, right?
Right.
And the doctor says, oh, I'm sorry. The test results were wrong, right? It wasn't you, right? Somebody else. And then you realize you've been living life, right? The wrong way. You've been living backwards. So it's that intensity of life, intensity, the vivacity of getting things done, of having a relentless approach, of having the fanaticism to having things manifest. And in the Pisces, it can have that still same fanaticism, but from a more um, emotional capitulation versus an intellectual or a mental one. So Uttara Bhadrapada is the last legs of the deathbed. It's ruled by the serpent of the deep. Now, when we were talking about floating on the water, right?
Mm-hmm.
With Pova Bhadrapada, well, something done dragged you down, right? Right. And any thought process of having any light possibility is gone. You're now sinking deep where the pressure, Saturn, is what? Pressures, right?
Right.
Of the deep. You're going down, and the serpent of the deep has the dragon, water dragon, because there's a fire dragon, which is Purvapada. There's a water dragon. It's dragging you to the depths of the ocean floor. And these layers pressurize. You go down too fast, your head pops, right? Your lungs
Yeah.
crush,
Right.
right? Your blood content changes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So you have to learn to breathe while you're underwater. That's how it feels for Uttara Bhadrapada. Right? You have to learn to understand that you got to be calm as you go in. You got to be relaxed and not panic. You got to, because see, Saturn is now pressurizing you. It is a very deeply emotional portion of all of the zodiac sign. It is extremely um, solemn, very spiritual though, because the more you, and this is the meditative portion of the zodiac. This is where meditation benefits the most. This is where um, stop ceasing to externalize is really part of it. People say I'm spiritual, they are really spiritual in the sense they try to practice what they preach and on the side of doing what they say they're going to do. If they say they meditate, you can probably find them meditating at some point in their life. They say they, live a certain creed or principle, you'll find them doing that for the most part. They live what they preach. But at the same time, depression can be a very major issue when they're not meditating or in some type of spiritual process of life. This is where you can become caught in the emotional undertow, the undertow, right? Um, it definitely is one that is kind of like nirvana, right before nirvana, right before self-realization. Right? It's the deep part of our sleep stage when there's no dreams and you're staring into the void. Planets placed here, if they're not very beneficial planets, like Saturn placed here, is very overwhelming. I think Bill Cosby has something like that, doesn't he? Right?
It's possible. Let me
I
see.
think Bill Cosby had Saturn in Uttara Bhadrapada. I'm almost certain of it. Right? Very serious-minded energy.
He does.
Nope, it's not a play there.
Yeah, he does. Saturn Uttara.
Did you get that sense? That's his ascendant, right? That's his
Yeah.
ascendant.
His ascendant,
yeah,
his ascendant is Ravati, but Saturn is in Uttara
is in,
Bhadrapada.
right? Do you get that seriousness from Bill?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he's funny to a degree, but the side of him that's funny is always capitulated on something realistic.
Right.
It's not like funny like Richard Pryor or
Yeah.
Eddie Murphy. It's a sobering funny.
Mm-hmm.
And that sobriety is part of this Uttara Bhadrapada piece. It doesn't just do things in haphazard or willy-nilly ways. So you got to consider, I know we kind of beat up on Bill a little bit. Bill, we don't mean no harm, right? But, if those things are true of what they say, these things were premeditated and thought out, because Uttara Bhadrapada doesn't do things haphazardly. It's not a free-flowing energy. It's very determined.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't give up. Imagine you got to get to the surface, or you got to get you. One of the two things got to happen. You get to the surface and breathe, or you got to get to the point where you learn how to breathe in the water. One of the two, more than likely the latter. So you got to learn
Mm-hmm.
how to calm and become completely cool, have a cool head. As you're seeing big sharks and whales go by, right? And you're going to the bottom. Imagine you can breathe, but you got to still get to the bottom, like a Jacques Cousteau or something like that, where you got to get to the bottom of the ocean to do some observational work. It gets kind of creepy, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You're like, ooh, I ain't never seen that kind of fish before. What is that? Right? Right. Things are, very nerve that are you have to have nerves of steel to a degree, and that's where the calming waters of Pisces helps. Saturn is a very serious energy, and Uttara Bhadrapada is very serious, just like it. So they have to watch out for depression. They have to watch out for addictions, because addictions, they try to use them to take them out of or put them into a place where they kind of move beyond this, right, deeper part.
Right.
Um, it's interesting that this is the last Saturn nakshatra, and that it is one that it finalizes the work. Right? It can not be lazy, but it can delay. It put things off. Right? It realizes the futility of kind of action to a degree anyway. Because Pisces is more non-action. It's action within to make action come about without. So if it's not properly internalized, it can just postpone and delay and delay and delay until Saturn crushes them to a point where it makes them become spiritual. It makes them become, no, you're going to do this one way or the other. If it's in prison, Bill, no pun intended, right? Or in a mosque or in a synagogue, you're going to face reality through spirituality. That's one of their kind of mottos, facing reality through what? Spirituality.
Right.
But they got to go deep. And either you learn to swim down deep and get something to go deep, or something what drags you what down.
Right.
You're going to go down either way. might as well go down willingly. This is where Osar dwells, right? Olokun in the Yoruba tradition would be more or less correlated to something like this. Olokun, like the waters of the deep. Yemeya is the kind of the um, ocean shore, right? She's where the coral reefs and the fish and all that kind of dwell. Well, Olokun is where that fish that has the little dangling light, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Think about that. The Supreme, in his wisdom, made a fish with a light at the bottom of the ocean so it could see what it's about to eat. And think about the feeling of that, of the fish. The last feeling you see is this light pop out, and then all of a sudden these teeth grab you, right? That's kind of what Uttara Bhadrapada kind of feels like to a degree. So, it's a very serious, very deep, very nonsensical nakshatra. The last of the Mohicans, right, is Ravati. And Ravati is, of the two fish, right? This is where the fish kind of swim. Uttara Bhadrapada is where the fish swim, and it's dark, and they may not have a whole school of fish, so they might be looking for a school, henceforth a religious tradition or
Mm-hmm.
spiritual. They might be looking for something to link up with, but Ravati is literally almost the line that the two fish are tied to. Right? It's the thing that keeps pulling them back and forth. Right? I'm trying to swim one way, you trying to swim the other way, and they create this kind of spinning momentum. So Ravati has that kind of disposition that they can get caught in whirlwinds, whirlpools, right, where they never can escape, right, these kind of frustrating dispositions, and confusion can set in. This is where Mercury is what? Isn't it something that Mercury is debilitated here, and it's its own nakshatra,
Right.
right?
It's his own
Kind of
worst
odd,
enemy.
huh?
It's his own worst enemy.
It's his own worst, man. That's a heck of a way of saying it, right? It's his own worst enemy, and that is true. Right? But they're very helpful. Pushan and this is of course between 16 degrees, 40 minutes to 30 degrees of Pisces, whereas the previous was 13 degrees, 20 minutes to 16 degrees, 40 minutes of Pisces. This is the last of the last of the last, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so it's kind of odd. They're very helpful. They're very light. They're much lighter than Uttara Bhadrapada, right? Much less serious minded. But they can it's the extremity of going over and not realizing how far to take themselves, right? Like you said, Bill Cosby is Ravati, and that makes more sense to have him have Saturn in that placement, but also have Ravati as a kind of way to chat to, because imagine if the degree was dead on at the ascendant degree with that, right? That would be very harsh energy to manage. But
Right.
it can be, this is the softer side of Pisces. One is very harsh and serious. In fact, both of them, Purvapada, Rapada, and Uttar, are very serious and harsh. This is the lighter side. This is the more jovial, this is the funnier side, right? This is the one that kind of makes things, takes life in its satire and makes people laugh.
Right.
Mercury's a jokester. So they can take things and make, life more pliable. But um, they can also get their feelings hurt fairly easy. They can be sensitive. Mercury is the intellect. And now let me make sure I make this statement about, and this is also a what? Nakshatra that deals with the Gandanta zone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, The intellect is kind of like the last thing to go. Did you know what is the last sense when you die that goes? Do you know?
I don't. Mm-hmm.
You ever think about it? Right? Your sight goes first, right? But the last to go, you can hear things around you. You can hear people talking. Oh my God, right? He's leaving. Get him back. It's like you're going in and you can still hear. Isn't that Mercury?
Yep.
Mercury
Yep.
is the ability. So the intellect, right? The ability to articulate, to differentiate, right? Is the last thing you must what? Sacrifice in order to move into the greater void of spiritual unfoldment. And so Mercury helps them by giving them a lighter sensitivity, a less harsh disposition, right? But it also makes them sensitive. And they try to take on too many things at once. And you become then what? Overwhelmed. The two
Right.
fish are pulling you. Hey, I need this. Hey, I need that. Hey, can you go over here? Hey, take me over there. And you try to go all these different directions and end up going where?
Nowhere.
So they make very good they make very good hospice workers because they bring a levity to the process of letting go. They let things be and they make it to where they can use your own gifts or your own um, thought processes to make things clear. They can talk to you they're very good at listening and hearing things about what you're going through, and then rehash them in a much broader context. They're excellent at this, but they also can get caught up in their own beliefs, their own illusions. They can believe something so much, right, and it be not true, and live out a life in this way where they never really make anything of themselves because they don't ever realize that they're believing in something or doing something that's not real. And this is what Mercury can do. It can trick you. It's a trickster entity. So they have to be very careful in this regard. Again, um, it can change shape. Like water takes the shape of its container, Mercury can allow them to change shape. They can be many things, but you have to choose in order to be able to come to a realization of doing it and then letting it go. And that's the harshest thing for Ravati to do, is to do something and let it go. Do something and then keep doing that until the point in which they realize that they're a master and a jack of all trades. You have to be both in Ravati. And that's harsh. That's why it's the harshest, even though it's very light, it's still hard to do. Now Venus is exalted here. Right? Venus is exalted, and you think Venus is up to exaltations is all fun and games. People. Right? To love, to love for the sake of what? Love,
Love.
right?
Yeah.
Unconditional. You don't have to do anything to deserve it. It's not that easy. They have a lot of expectations with Venus and Pisces. Exaltation, a lot of expectation. And what does it do? It takes these expectation and says, no, 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 until you just begin to say, you know what? I just have a big heart. I just love to love. I don't need any reason.
Right.
But they got to go through these things to get there. So if you have a moon there, the mother may also be one that is considered to be somewhat very spiritual, but also can be confused. Very giving, yet can be a doormat. So you got to consider, right, that these planets, if the fourth lord is there, same thing. Seventh lord, you may marry someone of this ilk. So this is when we understand. Now the last pada is the final what? Fig leaf, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where they're exalted or what? debilitated. It's that last pada. So it talks about literally moving into, right, the new karmic, right, outlay when Aries comes into play. And Mercury and Ketu bridge the gap. So, these are the things that we consider when we look at why those particular planets rule, right, or are linked to the water or water signs or signs that deal in the moksha principle. Right? We could go on forever, right? I could tell you all kind of things about each one of these nakshatras and the padas and so forth and the rulers, but I just want to give just an understanding of why it makes sense that these are chosen and how they connect in a more intimate and a much more deeper way than what is normally perceived from the surface.
Indeed. Indeed. Yeah, man. Big up to that. Young, go ahead and hold up. This Ninth Lord Films logo, and embodies a lot of what we was just talking about. In Pisces or whatnot. Let me pull that up real quick before we get out of here. Here we go. So that's like, here this is like Rahu being pulled out of the serpent of the deep. There's a bird is Jupiter. You understand what I'm saying? It's another Jupiter principle here, floating on the feather or whatnot. You know what I'm saying?
That's tight. Yeah, it looks very Piscean.
Yeah, that's what, the
It looks very
ocean.
Piscean. Definitely. Definitely. Got some, yeah, got some of that energy that makes you kind of feel, you know, spiritualized or looking at it from a more spiritual perspective.
Yeah,
Yeah, fits it
whatnot.
very well.
Indeed,
Very, very well.
indeed.
Yes, sir. Awesome.
All right,
Awesome. Good
folks.
stuff.
Appreciate that, man. I try to, try to design it to embody and serve as a. I mean, that's a lot of logos do that for people as well. I mean, they're like talismans,
Yeah, there are ancient way of our ancestors wrote in logos. Right.
Right. Right.
We had a logo language considered, right?
Right.
And the glyphs, the meta nature is not just words. They're not just pictures. They're not just letters. They're picture words, right? So when you begin to understand them from what they are, right? The Ankh, right, is a word unto itself, right? But it's just a symbol, and then it has many, many connotations and meanings. But when you add it in the context of others, it becomes, like a computerized way of creating a thought process in the mind, where that one picture, that one logo, right? And logos is word, right? If you think about it, and the logos in the word was in the beginning was the word, right? And the word was, it's the same kind of concept where you use, not the symbol of the ibis bird, but the actual stork kind of looking bird, right? Has a whole connotation of meanings that go along with it, and it's not just a letter, right? So we are logo using people, right? And that makes sense when you use it that way because it evokes something. It pulls people into a thought process without any kind of exchange or dialogue. So yeah, it's
Right.
a powerful tool, definitely. Definitely.
Indeed. So, this has been episode 22 of season 5, episode 122 overall. Before we get out of here, I want to remind you all, make sure to like and subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you can know when we drop new content on this particular platform or whatnot. And we're getting close, like we said, we got a special final episode for of season 5 that's going to be fire or whatnot, so definitely stay tuned to that. Those in Patreon, you already got a little bit of a sneak peek of what we're talking about and different things like that, so definitely stay tuned for that. Rod, you got anything to say to the people before we get out?
No, just we appreciate your, viewing and participation and watching us throughout the seasons. So, we hope that we've definitely enlightened you all in some form or fashion and given us, given our, family and, folks to something to, twist and turn the mind in a way that begins to think about astrology from various perspectives. So I just want to say it's been a good season so far. I've enjoyed it, and I definitely look forward to, bringing more good content. So appreciate y'all.
Indeed. And with that being said, this has been episode 22, and we'll be back with another great episode next week. All right, we out, and everybody be safe out there, and peace.